am number one, not number two. If I'm not the one, I'm uncomfortable. See the competition I've been running through. Leveled up, I only see them in my rear view. Switch. Yeah, I'm ballin'. Yeah, I'm ballin'.
Welcome back to the channel. Today we're going to be going over my squat training session 10 weeks out from my next meet, July 13th. If you're new to the channel, my name is Paul O'Neid, and I've been one of the strongest people on the planet, having ranked in the top 20 all-time in powerlifting. I've coached some of the strongest athletes in the world. I've also been a strength and conditioning coach for the last 18 years, working in the NCAA Division I, Division II, and CIS. I've coached people across all professional sports. I've seen it, I've done it, I've got the scars and the trophies to prove it, and I'm trying to get back on the platform myself. So welcome to the session. This session started off with some seated leg curls. Seated leg curls is something that I've been implementing to the beginning of my training for quite a while now, and it's for two reasons. Starting training with hamstrings before squatting or deadlifting can have a few different potential benefits. The first one being we're taking advantage of something called reciprocal inhibition. So by training a muscle, we reciprocally inhibit the antagonist muscle. So by training the hamstrings, which work to extend the hip, we actually help to relax the hip flexors and open up a little bit more hip extension. If we're squatting, that's going to be really important to get into the bottom of our squat position. So we're actually improving our hip mobility by training our hamstrings. The next thing that we're doing with this is we are just putting a ton of blood into that hamstring and a ton of blood behind the knee. So having more blood in the hamstrings will help to reduce a little bit of that quad tension that I feel. The reason I was off powerlifting for the last 2 years was due to ongoing knee and hip pain. So by really hammering my hamstrings before I get into my squatting, it's helped improve my hip mobility and decrease my knee pain. Some things that I'm doing a little bit differently on this particular hamstring variation. This machine is not the best because of the way the plates are loaded. It's very, very, very light when the legs are straight. It gets very heavy about halfway through the range of motion, and then again gets very light as you get into that fully flexed position. So what I'm doing here is, number one, I'm tempoing the eccentric. So I am controlling the lengthening portion of the movement. The other thing that I'm doing is I'm slightly pausing in that end range. So at the top and at the bottom, I'm just trying to pause ever so slightly to maintain full control. The last thing I'm doing, you'll see, is I'm leaning forward. The thing I'm using to lean forward is called a daisy chain. So a daisy chain is something very cheap. It's usually used for climbing, but I use them to anchor myself within different exercises depending on my needs. Within this leg curl variation, it allows me to really lock myself into that forward leaning position. Why am I leaning forward? I'm leaning forward for a few different reasons. The first is this machine makes it really, really easy to compensate by arching the low back and using that in the movement. That's actually one of the main reasons my hip hurts, is because my default is to extend my hip. By using those daisy chains, it stacks my rib cage and pelvis on top of itself, putting me into a posterior tilt and not allowing me to compensate with that low back extension. The other thing that does is it further flexes the hip, making it a lot more intense of a muscle contraction in that fully stretched position. So in this movement, I'm using 3 sets of about 12 to 20 repetitions, keeping the weight the same and allowing myself naturally to have rep drops every set. So each set is taken about 1 to 2 reps short of failure. Typically, I am stopping the set before I lose control of the movement. So I'm not using any sort of intensification strategies or any sort of momentum to get a few extra sets. I'm really trying to stay locked in with my technique, and as soon as I can't stay locked in, I'm cutting the set off. From there, I moved over to safety bar squat against chains. This is my down week of squatting, meaning I alternate between heavy squats in knee wraps and then lighter squats, quote unquote, with the chains. This lighter squat week allows me to feel a bit of an overload at the top, but underloads at the bottom. The reason I've chosen the safety bar is because my personal weakness in the squat is my ability to maintain stability in my upper back. The angle of that safety bar's camber really pushes you forward and makes you try very, very hard to maintain that upright posture. Now, why am I using chains? Chains are a form of accommodating resistance, meaning as you lower into the bottom of the squat, the chain is resting on the ground more and more. So at the bottom of that squat, when that chain is fully deloaded, I'm only having the weight of the bar on my back. As I come up out of the bottom, the chain comes off the floor and adds to that external load. This forces me to continue to accelerate all the way through that range of motion. Our body has natural protective mechanisms within it. We have muscle spindles within our muscles, and we also have Golgi tendon organs within our tendons. These act as receptors to the nervous system for tension and stretch. So as I extend my elbow while I'm pressing, or as I extend my knee while I'm squatting, you will actually stop recruiting muscle fibers towards that end range to prevent you from getting injured. What these chains do is they inhibit that reflex. Because it's getting heavier, I have to continue to push against it, which is why this accommodating resistance strategy is usually used for people trying to improve their rate of force development. So I have to continue to produce force through the entire range of motion all the way through lockout, and it can really help with developing speed. Chains, bands, they work very similarly and are phenomenal in athletic training endeavors. Powerlifting, they also overload that top range of motion. So at the top of this squat, on my top set, it's actually about 615 pounds, where at the bottom, it's only 495 pounds. So there's 120 pounds of additional resistance at the top. With the safety bar and the chains actually force you way more forward than you would just with a typical safety bar squat. So this was really, really hard. This is the first week I've actually introduced this variation. Worked my way up from 1 plate to 2 plate to 3 plate to 4 plate, doing about, 5 reps, 3 reps, 1 rep, 1 rep, 1 rep. From 4 plates, I went 4.5, and then to 5 plates for my top single. The goal with that 5 plate squat is just to hold something heavy, leave some room in the tank, and having somewhere to build from in the subsequent weeks. I'll probably have 4 more exposures to this movement leading into the competition. So I didn't want to completely blow my load on this one. Went up to 5 plates, and then for my down work, I dropped down to 425 pounds of bar weight, and I performed 3 sets of 3 repetitions. The goal here was maintaining that upright posture and not letting that bar fold me over. I was surprised at how hard the down sets were compared to how comfortable that top set felt, but I'm still working on getting my powerlifting stamina back. So that stamina that needs to be there with heavy weights. Even so, 425 pounds on the bar plus 120 pounds of chain works out to, almost 550 pounds at the top. So it's not necessarily light by any means. Next week on my heavy week, I'm actually going to be going up over 700 for the first time in about 3 years. So I'm really excited for that. But I also wanted to make sure that this week I didn't go too crazy and really mess up my ability to go heavy on the weeks that count. These weeks are really to improve on my weak points, whereas next week when I'm squatting in knee wraps, it's to practice the skill of squatting. From squat, I moved into leg press. Leg press for me right now, most people will implement leg press in a bodybuilding scenario. For me, having transitioned back into powerlifting recently, implementing the leg press is more so to maintain the benefits that I gained from bodybuilding. So I'm working on controlling my eccentrics, controlling and holding tension in that bottom position, and squeezing out of the bottom with as much control as I can, driving through the quads. Because of my injury history, I can't get a lot of volume in on actual barbell squatting. So I'm using the leg press as a means to accumulate volume, number one, maintain the tolerance of my tissues to load, and then also to achieve a deeper hip position than I would with a barbell squat. So it's actually a loaded mobility exercise in a lot of ways. A bit of a tertiary benefit to the leg press that I don't think most people consider is it teaches us to yield against force. So to absorb force, especially in that bottom position. So what I'm actually doing on my second set, so my first set, I'm working up to a heavy set of, 12 to 15 repetitions, full control. I think I got 8 plates for 14 reps here. Probably stopped 2 to 3 reps short of failure, but that's okay. I'm more so concerned with getting the movement and executing it properly and building towards the future. My down set, I stripped off 2 plates per side and then used a very strict 4-second eccentric tempo and a 2-second pause. Again here, tempo and pauses are fantastic for building tissue tolerance and positional access. So I'm getting into that deep hip and knee flexed position, holding that tension, squeezing out of the bottom. These are something that are more in place to keep me healthy. I did push these pretty hard, probably harder than my coach Danny wanted me to, but I was feeling really good on the day and I didn't see any reason not to. Sitting here a day later, I'm very sore. So a good point to pull back, but I know that for next time. From the leg press, moved into a Bulgarian split squat. There's nothing fancy about this variation. The video kind of cut off my head, so I'm sorry about that. But what you can see is I'm not using a bench. I'm actually using a 12-inch box. A bench is somewhere in the neighborhood of 16 to 18 inches high. The higher that back foot, the more demand for hip internal rotation you will require to maintain position. I don't have access to a lot of internal rotation, so simply by lowering the height of the box behind me, I can maintain better position and better control. Some cues that I'm using here, I'm allowing the dumbbells to kind of pull me down into the ground, rooting myself onto my front foot, my big toe, and my medial heel. And then I'm trying to stay completely square on the way down, get a good pause at the bottom, and squeeze up. This is very sneaky core work, as my coach Danny would say. So forcing my core to stabilize in that upright posture, getting nice and deep into that hip flexed position, and staying square rather than allowing the dumbbells to rotate me in and out of positions. I did 2 sets here, or no, I actually did 3 sets here. 1 set with 40 pounds, 2 sets with 50, just 8 reps per side. Again, stopping about 3 to 5 reps short of failure, focusing on position rather than pushing load. This is something where I can add load in the weeks to come or add repetitions per set. From there, I moved into leg extension. So leg extension, again, typically in a bodybuilding scenario, used to build up hypertrophy within the quads. For me, more so of a tissue tolerance exercise. You'll notice that I have a yoga mat between my shins and the pad of the machine. This is to increase the knee flexion range of motion of the movement. And then I'm also stopping short of lockout. And with that short stop from lockout, I'm also pulling my hips into me, forcing myself to engage my rectus femoris, which is a flexor of the hip. So I'm getting a bit of a secondary effect there to train the rectus femoris. And you'll notice my tempo is very controlled, stopping in both the top end and the bottom end of the rep range, using a nice, slow, controlled eccentric and no momentum. Again, if the goal is tissue tolerance, we want to have as much tension on the target muscle as possible. These are movements that, especially the leg extension, when I was hurt, I could not perform a leg extension pain-free. Modifying them the way I have and progressing them over time have allowed them to become a very pain-free movement. And in fact, if I am having any knee pain and I go to do some leg extensions, after a set or two, there's so much blood in my quads and my hip flexors are nice and active that I will no longer have knee pain. So it's a movement I can get to when I am in pain, do it, and then it relieves my pain. That kind of concludes the weightlifting portion of the session. Get into some core work. As a powerlifter, training your core is very, very important. It's often underprescribed, and I'm doing a few different things with these decline crunches. First, you'll notice that I am exhaling fully at the bottom, and I'm trying to pull my low abs in and curling myself up one vertebrae at a time. The key for me is not feeling my upper abdominals and trying to keep the movement in my lower abdominals. My upper abdominals are way overactive, and this is a compensation pattern that had developed over time. But this movement for me is a nice sneaky way to get my low abs involved. The better you are able to access low ab control, typically the better you will be at controlling your hip range of motion. So this is like sneaky rehab and core all put together. These were really hard. Even doing 2 sets of 10 was exhausting. That full exhale prior to crunching up made the movement infinitely harder than just bracing and pulling with your hip flexors. If I was to do these with my typical like old school style, I could probably load a 45-pound plate on my forehead and get sets of 15 to 20 easy. But with that exhale and low ab engagement, sets of 10 absolutely crushed me. Again, using a very slow tempo, making sure that I am keeping the goal the goal. Finish the session off with a corrective exercise. This is called a modified hook lying 90-90. So I'm above parallel with regards to the angle of my hip to knee, and I'm squeezing a ball between my knees ever so slightly. The key here is a soft inhale through the nose, exhale through the mouth, pulling the low abs down. This is more of a reset. So after a heavy training session, for me, my default is to be very, very forward, to lose connection with the insides of my feet, and default into more externally rotated and forward-oriented position. By performing this movement at the end of the session, it kind of gives my central nervous system the okay to keep access to my internal rotators. And I can tell you today, after doing that, the discomfort in my hips and low back is greatly reduced. If I hadn't have done that and done a heavy training session, my low back would probably be quite sore today, but I don't have any discomfort in it at all. So I hope you really enjoyed this kind of walkthrough of the training session. If there's anything more like this that you'd like to see, please let me know. I'll try to record at least 1 or 2 sessions a week, give rundowns like this as I get ready for my first trip back to the platform in the last 2.5 years. I'm not really going for any big PRs this meet. I'd like to squat somewhere around 750, bench somewhere north of 400, and then deadlift anywhere between 720 to 750. My PR on the deadlift is 727. I would love to hit a PR deadlift. I'm feeling very strong, very confident in my deadlift. So if there was one lift I would look to PR, it would be the deadlift. But ultimately, my goal for this meet is to get on the platform, have some fun, compete with my friends, and build some momentum for the future. Thanks for joining me. I hope to see you at the next video. Please make sure to like, share, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, and we'll catch you at the next one.